Hello! So today I am here to bring you the second part of my April wrap-up. I read 4 books in the second half. I will link my first wrap-up down below. I also read 4 books then, so 8 all in total, so I'm still not quite back up to the standard that I was last year, but it's not bad. I mean, 8 books in a month, I'm quite happy to take that. That's kind of the goal I'm setting myself at the moment. So I'll get straight into it with my library book for the month, which was Whatever Happened to Interracial Love by Kathleen Collins. I picked this up purely because it was in the newsstand at the library and I have seen a few people talking about it. So it's a short story collection that was written in the 60s and 70s, and it was written by a black woman who was quite active in the sort of black movement and fighting for rights and things like that. She was unpublished in her life, but she has since become quite well known for, I think she's done a few film scripts and things like that from what I was gathering from the introduction in this. So she's sort of developing a bit of a following, and this has recently come out, which is her first short story collection. It was a little bit disappointing for me. Now, partly I went into it expecting it to be quite racially relevant and sort of political and fighting for rights and things like that, and it kind of was. A title story, Whatever Happened to Interracial Love, does look briefly at a relationship between a black woman and a white man, and it kind of does look at also the way that black women are expected to behave quite a lot. Generally, that's the only sort of discussion on race. This is mainly really about love, irrelevant of race, and of going out into the world and experiencing college and things like that. It was only a 3-star for me. Now, there's no denying that she can write. The woman can really write. I think there was a reason that these weren't published, especially as one collection, because it's been done after she's passed away, and it's sort of obviously a load of her work that wasn't specifically meant to go together, or that she maybe didn't even intend to be published. And you can see that, and there are certainly sort of direct sentences that appear in stories sort of throughout. See that some of them were sort of stories that she's then gone on to develop, but both stories have appeared in the collection, so it kind of didn't work as a whole for me. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this. As I say, it's good writing, it's just not really at a place where I think it should have necessarily been published, but that's just my opinion. I was slightly disappointed. Then on to my non-fiction for the month, which was Lucky by Alice Sebold. Alice Sebold is the person who wrote The Lovely Bones. This is a memoir written about when she was raped in college. Now, I will say first and foremost, I don't believe in trigger warnings. I don't shy away from things that are quite uncomfortable in books. I think that's what books are for. They're there to shake you up. The first section of this especially, but it does appear again throughout, she does not gloss over what happened to her in any way. She goes into very distinct detail. It's frankly uncomfortable to read, and I read a lot of things that are uncomfortable, but the rape in this was hard to read, especially I think more so because you know that it actually happened to her, and because you can understand how hard it must have been for her to write about it in such detail. But that said, I think this is such an important book, and it made me angry in so many ways. I think it was in the 80s, Alice Sebold was 18, and obviously we have issues now with how rape is represented and how hard it is to actually get a conviction, and obviously in the 80s it was a lot harder. To be fair, she went straight to the people in her university and said straight away what had happened, and obviously she was completely battered and bruised. They went straight to the hospital, did all the tests that needed to be doing and stuff, but even then, when they were filing the police report, the police even wrote notes sort of saying doubt it will go any further. Then it just so happens that Alice Sebold makes the decision to go back to her university, which nobody's really expecting her to do, and she bumps into the man who raped her on the street, and he says something to her like, oh, haven't I seen you before, sort of taunting her almost. And she then goes straight to her university. She draws up a picture of what she remembers of him and calls up the police straight away. On the drawing, they recognise him as someone that they are already aware of, and the proceedings go from there. It's difficult because there were certain people in here and certain ways that things proceeded that the police were very much on her side. The only arguments that they could go off of to defend the guy were to say that she either asked for it, that she was wearing skimpy clothing, which really made me angry. They actually asked her what she was wearing as though that had any relevance, or the fact that she had mistakenly identified him. They very much tried to push that. But to one extent, the police were quite supportive. But on the other hand, it just made me so angry the way in some respects she was treated. Certainly in the way that they at first just said that it wasn't going to go any further. So it very much gets your feminist anger going. but it's also so important. Instead of being quiet and shy and sort of not feeling brave enough to come forward about what happened to her, she very much learns that telling her story has power. She's one of the very few rape victims who actually gets as far in court and actually manages to capture the guy. So I would definitely recommend. Even though it's hard, it's worth it. Then I read The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. This was my sort of young adult book for the month. I know it's not really young adult, it's sort of a bit younger than that, but it's on my young adult shelf, so I got rid of it. I am kind of not a Neil Gaiman fan, I've decided. Like, I've read The Ocean at the End of the Lane and Neverwhere, and both of them were average. And The Graveyard Book was average as well, sadly, which is odd because Neil Gaiman is an author that I really enjoy to watch speak, and I think he's a wonderful man. But his books just don't really inspire me. So this is about a boy who basically his family gets murdered when he is a baby, and by pure chance really he ends up toddling out of the house while the murderer is there after him, and ends up finding himself in a graveyard where there are ghosts who decide to take him in, and he gets free reign of the graveyard. It's quite fun, it's light-hearted, but I kind of got bored of it in the end. It kind of goes on throughout. We have the storyline of the guy who murdered his family and sort of the graveyard trying to keep the boy safe from that, and find out also why the boy's family was murdered in the first place. But I was kind of, as I say, bored by the end of it. I don't know if that's just because it's not my kind of thing or because it's written for a much younger audience than me. That said, I have read plenty of books for younger audiences that have kept me gripped. But yeah, this was just not necessarily my cup of tea. It was okay, it was average. Then I read Gilead by Marilyn Robinson. This is it's going to be a hard book to talk about because I just don't know what my feelings are. Ultimately, I was disappointed by this. Now, I can't deny that the writing is good, and there were some moments in here that it was so good. But as a whole, it just didn't work for me. I'm actually going to change my star rating. I did give it a 4, but I'm going to knock it down to 3. There was a lot wrong with this, and it's actually a quite bizarrely written book. So it's about a man called John. He's a preacher, and he is writing a letter to his 7-year-old son because he knows that he is going to die. So the whole book is just this one long letter. Now, firstly, I think it would have been better broken up, and I did read through reviews, and a lot of people said it was rambling, and it is very rambling. But I think if it was broken up into separate letters or separate chapters even, it might not have been so bad, but it's one long thing. Secondly, I feel like the choice to have it written in a letter in the first place was a bit bizarre, because okay, he wants to write this letter to his son to sort of tell him about the world and teach him the lessons that he has learnt and that he won't be around to teach him, but he ends up not really talking to his son or even about his son. He ends up talking about his own life. Particularly, he focuses on his best friend's son, who has his name and was sort of a namesake, but he found very difficult to understand this boy, and he didn't love this boy in the way that he thought that he should, and it very much focuses on that, which I thought was odd. I can understand that it was all about forgiveness, that ultimately he needed to work through that because it was something that had really been bothering him. But I just thought it was a really bizarre focus, especially if you're writing a letter to your son. I don't think your son's going to care about the kid that you didn't really like that much. It's possible that it would have been better if this was written as a sort of diary rather than a letter to his son, because I really didn't feel that he was particularly writing it for his son at all. And also the timelines all over the place. The character John himself is underdeveloped because of the writing of the letter, and also you have the typical problem of a book written in a letter or in second person where the writer is kind of stating the obvious, as it were. So like he'd be like, oh, you are outside right now playing, and it feels clunky and it doesn't really work. Also, there is a lot of religion in here, and almost to a preachy degree of religion. Everything, obviously he's a preacher, but everything he says come back to God, and there's a lot of God quotes in here, and that's not something that I'm particularly interested in. So ultimately, this was a major disappointment for me. That said, there are some moments in here that are very poignant, and what they, I think, are supposed to be throughout the book, that it's this life-affirming sort of really lovely collection of what this man has learnt to pass on to his son. But for the most part, it just didn't work. I think there was some really odd literary choices that just all combined together made it a really bizarre book to read. So that's everything I read in the second half of April. Let me know down below what you've been reading, and I'll see you next time. Bye!